Okay, so it's officially 12 o'clock. So we'll go ahead and get kicked off. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. If you are expecting to get some CME delivered from St. Houston State University's College of Osteopathic Medicine, then you are in the right place, and we're very glad to have you. Today, we are going to be diving into part 2 of the adult learning series that Ms. Clair Collins is overseeing. She is our Director of Academic Infrastructure and Professional Development here at SHSU-COM. She is also an alum of SHSU and currently completing her doctorate degree at University of Houston. Without further ado, it's a lot of good content to cover. And so I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to her, and we will provide all of the code information at the very end. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them along the way. And Ms. Collins.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Ms. Browning. Okay, so last time we met, and if you weren't here last time, that's totally okay. I'll give a refresher. But last time we met, we talked about adult learning theory. Mostly, we talked about just some really high-level concepts. We'll retouch some of those in just like a very shallow kind of way, just so that as we continue this conversation, no one is left out if you didn't attend last time. But today we'll be concentrating a lot on moving from theory and into practice. So a little less about what do the scholarly journals say, and a little bit more about what do we actually do when we have a student rotating with us or a resident, and we're needing to put some best practices into play. So our objectives for today are very straightforward. We're going to learn how to explain backwards design in curriculum development and why that's important, not only to you if you have residents, but also to SHSU-COM. We are going to create sessions using the Where To Learning Plan method. You are going to be able to evaluate sessions for best practices in adult learning. And then also you'll be able to create positive and effective learning environments for any students that you come in contact with. So the first thing that we're going to go over is really just left over from last time. So last time, we talked a little bit about expectations of our students, right? We discovered that there are 3 types of learners. There's the learning-oriented learner, and they feel the need to learn, and they accept their load. And that's where we need to get. We need learners who are ready to engage with our academic content, and that they are willing to basically do the work that it takes to get from point A to point B. And one of the reasons I always like to start with this slide is when we're talking about working with students, a lot of faculty members, both at clinical sites and then also in-house at our medical school, they feel a lot of tension around this concept of students have to carry their share of the load. A lot of times when a student isn't performing up to par, there is a lot of anxiety around that, and faculty start looking internally and saying, what am I doing wrong? Why isn't the student succeeding? It has to be a me issue. While that is sometimes the case, in medical school, a lot of times what we see is that a student hasn't accepted their share of the load, or the student is resistant to that load. Because you all have been through medical school, right? You know that the load students are being asked to carry is really heavy, right? And it's also really more advanced than what we would see at undergrad or at the master's level, like the deep dive into the curriculum and the concepts and the approaches are just infinitely more difficult. And so sometimes what we have is students who are resistant to making that transition. And so I just want to always start out by saying, you want a learning-oriented student, but if a student hasn't accepted their share of that load, that is not something that you are able to necessarily change. We never want someone to, what is the colloquial term? We don't want to dumb down the curriculum, right? That's not going to produce good doctors. That is not going to have positive patient outcomes. That is not what we want. So instead, we have to refocus the student and provide enough structure that the student is able to say, oh, now I have enough resources in place to accept this load so that I can thrive. And that kind of pushes us into the next session. So we talked about three major theories last time. And so the first one was about tough, and it was about what do we supply versus what do the students supply. And the first one was we provide an academic environment that is meaningful and appropriate for the students, that it is inclusive and engaging, and meets the students where they are. The next one was that the material is relevant to the students and timely. And the third one is that it is practical. You don't ever want to teach, right? Like there's a reason why in medical school, we do not teach students engineering coursework. They would never use that. So it needs to be relevant. The second one that we covered was McCluskey. And McCluskey is all about this idea. I talked a little bit about balance and load just a minute ago. So students sometimes, if you think of them as a scale, kind of get out of whack, and we want to help that. And we want to make sure that their power, the things that push them through and allow them to thrive, is equal to or more than their load. And that's all of the things that they have going on, all of the things that they have to tend to. We know that for a medical student, a lot of that load, when you're talking about pushing someone down so that they can no longer thrive, a lot of that comes from the actual content and the demands on their schedule, right? We know that students are asked to do a lot. They're asked to do a lot in the classroom, and they're asked to do a lot out in clinical rotations, and they're asked to do a lot when they go home. The studying never really stops, and it doesn't stop through residency, right? So we have to be able to get them adjusted so that they start putting things in place to tip that power the other direction. On our end, I want to let you know that we have an office here at SHSUCOM called Medical Student Affairs. And if you ever sense that a student's load is getting too heavy, that you're starting to see some wellness indicators, so some like red flags start to pop up, and you're getting sort of concerned about a student, say their anxiety is really high, then the Medical Student Affairs office here, you can direct a student there and just say, hey, you probably want to get in contact with either your regional clinical coordinator or medical student affairs so that we can get you aligned with services. Our students here have been historically very good at self-identifying when they need to have those services in place and getting aligned with those services, but it never hurts for you to know what that office is, and that we will take care of those students so that we can get them back out and to you at a clinical rotation, happy, healthy, ready to learn. And the final thing that we talked about was by Knowles, which was andragogy. And andragogy really just has 6 steps. The learners need to know why, what, and how, right? We talked about why, what, and how last time a lot. Why, what, and how they're learning. Why is it important? Why is it timely? They need to have their self-concept of the learner. Our adult learners, right, are very autonomous. That's one of the key indicators. You are an autonomous learner. I am an autonomous learner. Our students are autonomous learners, meaning they're going to learn basically by their own rules on their own schedule, and no one's going to tell us differently, right? That was one of the things I talked about last time, is adult learners are almost delightfully stubborn. And that's not a bad thing. And then they also have to be ready to learn, which aligns with what we said earlier in the first slide, right? That a student has to be ready. The orientation to their learning has to be there. And then they also need a motivation to learn. So for our students, the motivation is already there, right? So they want to get through medical school, they want to be doctors, that is their motivation to learn. You don't need a whole lot more than that. Some students are also very motivated by the end goal of serving patients. So just know that sometimes a student is less interested in what I would call the competitive academic nature of medicine, and they're more interested in the patient care side. And then the final thing we kind of talked about was this concept of self-directed learning, right? That we're going to have students, and they're going to start out kind of in this lower level as dependent learners with the teacher as the authority figure. We talked about sage on the stage, that the instructor is the center of the universe, and that we have to get them, by the time that they get to you all, they should really be in this zone 3. So we have an involved learner, and then the instructor is more of a facilitator. What you'll see if you work with residents, right, is that residents should really be fully self-directed. They should be in that S4 where you are able to delegate projects to them, that they are an instructor themselves and they are coming to you as an expert and a colleague, and less as someone that's having to teach them everything all of the time. That's very normal. So we're ready to jump into some new material. Okay, the first thing I want to talk about, you'll see this orange bar running across the top of the self-directed learning. I always put this in here because it is a concept that we call scaffolding. So if you are familiar with curriculum design at all or working with adult learners, you know that the term scaffolding comes up a lot. And this concept is really just that, you know, learning is not a flat road, it is a staircase. And that in order to get there, there are obstacles to move up every single stair. But the scaffolding has to do with level of difficulty of material and the level of engagement of either the instructor or the learner. And then really what we're talking about here on this slide is the concept that when you are introducing a concept to someone, like I have approached this session as if you all know nothing about adult learners, right? Last time we talked about theory, today we're talking about theory to practice. So in doing that, I am assuming that you all are on this bottom tier here. So I need to introduce these concepts. And then today, right, I am reinforcing some of what we did last time. And then we're going to move from reinforcement into mastery a little bit, but not so much, right? You're not going to be ready for that. In order to get you to mastery on this topic, we'd probably need at this point like a workshop or a class or years in the field, and that's perfectly normal. And so one of the things I want to talk to you about is that when our students come to you, there will be some things where they will have already been introduced to certain topics, and what you are doing in a clinical environment is reinforcing something or even leading towards mastery, but that you will often encounter students who this is the first time they're seeing something. Certainly with almost every procedure they will see with you, it will be their first time being there with a live patient, watching it be done and helping in that environment. So I say all of that to say, this is a way to kind of manage expectations in an academic environment. It is unfair to both you as the instructor and to a student in the environment if we are meant to be introducing, but then we are assessing them at a mastery level. And so I always think about sewing, or for you all, this would be stitching, right? Is, you know, when I was growing up, I used to sew quite a bit, and it was a mess the first like dozen times I ever tried to do something, and I had to get better at it over time. But the feedback that I would get was always, this looks really good for your level. If I'm supposed to be doing a perfect stitch every single time, the very first time I ever touched a needle and thread, that's certainly not going to happen. I'm not some kind of savant. I have to know my own limitations. And so I just want to remind you of that, to be kind to the students and understand that it's going to take a minute from them to get from introduction to mastery. And that is okay, and that is appropriate. I would also add to this that it is also totally fair for you to dictate what that timeline looks like. So if you're working with a student over and over again, and you're seeing a very specific type of patient population, which would mean you are having very kind of standard interactions, it is okay if you say, so this will be our first introduction to this, and by the end of the week or the end of 2 days with me, I expect you to have mastery of this type of interaction. That's fair for you to put that timeline, as long as the timeline is appropriate. And because you are an expert, we'll trust that you know what an appropriate timeline looks like. Okay, so this is a very busy slide, and I apologize for that. I want to talk to you a little bit about, you will be getting kind of job descriptions from us, like what are your expectations, and then also what are our curricular needs. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about what this looks like. So this is a very, very, very busy slide, lots of arrows, but I promise it is not as awful as it seems. I want to talk about backwards design. And so backwards design is this concept that instead of starting from the left with learning and then feeding out and saying like, these are all of the things and then pushing this direction, what we do is we start with the objectives over here on the right, okay? So SHS UCOM has a standard set of competencies that we follow, and then we have learning objectives that come out of that. So those get fragmented. And so what we're seeing here is this big rectangle, which is like our broad program objectives, get busted out into course objectives. The course objectives, so if you're on a clinical rotation, say you're in our adult medicine clinical rotation, then you will have certain course objectives that the students need to have accomplished by the time they leave. So there are many times when you may not have access to every single patient scenario that walks in the door based on these course objectives. That's okay. We have a third-party piece of software that will provide all of those scenarios for our students. So I never want you to worry about, I didn't have a very specific type of patient come in over these 4 weeks with these students, and so that's going to cause us problems. Never worry about that. But the course objectives get broken down into basic topics. And those topics could be pharmacology, biochemistry. It could be something having to do with primary care. It could be something having to do with end-of-life care. And they're kind of broad in nature. And then there's specific activities. These little circles here are the specific activities we're doing that we're pushing the learning out, that all kind of culminate in this bigger learning the students are doing. And what we do, the reason that we do backwards curriculum design is there are many, many people who are delivering this curriculum, right? So it's not just you as one person in a clinical rotation. We have faculty members in years 1 and 2. We have course directors. We have other medical electives and selectives that our students will be taking care of. And if we started from the left, what would happen is we'd have a lot of overlap. So you see these blue circles here, that represents as something's being taught more than once for no particular reason. So, and that happens if you use forward curriculum design, that what you find is that you have a lot of people who are teaching the same thing, but because they weren't communicating with each other, then you just have redundancy, which means lost time with the students, lost effort and frustration, right? And so one of the things that we do is here at SHS UCOM, we use this backwards design. And so what that means is basically we think of our end goal first. So how do we assess the students? And then we push things to your course objectives and then to your topics. And then you'll have specific tasks that need to be done. And that's how we do the learning, so that at the end, we don't end up with any of these blue circles. We end up with exactly what we need with little to no overlap to have the best outcomes for our students, and so that you can spend your time the best way possible. I will also add here, if you are one of our clinical partners that is starting a residency program or has a new residency program, or heck, maybe you're looking to do just some curriculum redesign within a residency program, that this process is by scholars Wiggins and McTeague, and they'll come up in the next slide. But this is actually considered best practice in curriculum development. So if you are trying to kind of wrap your head around how do I build curriculum for medical students or for residents, then remember that you want to start kind of with a reverse pyramid, a funnel. Start with your broad items and then get down to your specific items, and then your output is big at the end. Also, I will put a plug here. If you are working on curriculum design and you would like to have me come out to help you all kind of synthesize this information and get this together for you all and help you all in this process, this is actually kind of what we're here to do. This is part of faculty development, and we're more than happy to come out and visit your clinical sites to relay this information for you all. Okay, so moving on. The where to model. Okay, this is a very, very busy slide, okay? But the reason it is busy is I want to show you all that this is aligned with the theories we use. So where to is like WHERTO, And really what it is it's how do we get things done? How do we make interesting sessions? How do we make sure that the students are engaged, right? We talked about that the students have to be engaged in the learning, but we as instructors also have to have meaningful interactions with the students. And this is how you do it. So you have to think about if you're a taxi and you're the driver of the taxi, the first thing that you ask the customer, right, is where to? So just think of it that way. As you're going on a journey together, and this is how you'll do it. So the first piece is the W. So you just need to tell students where they're headed, where they're going, and how are they going to be evaluated. Remember that students respond really well to structure. So when you are putting together an idea of how to explain something to students, sometimes it's really easy to start with how they're going to be evaluated first, and then work your ways backwards. And then in the H, so this is how are you going to hook and hold the student's interest? I will tell you honestly, you should have no issue with this because you are in a patient care environment. Our students are pretty interested and enthusiastic right away. I would not concern yourself too much with an H. Now, if you are one of our residency programs and you are doing didactic sessions, this is something that you'll want to think about. And those didactic sessions, right, in case you're not familiar with that terminology, a didactic session is really just like what we're doing right now. So an in-person discussion, not as hands-on, and then also it has kind of the instructor is sort of that sage on the stage model. Okay, the first E, what experiences are you going to help provide the students? And so really be thoughtful about what these experiences are supposed to be. You'll be interacting with a variety of patients with these students. And so one of the things I would recommend in our very first training, we talked about the 1 minute preceptor. And that concept is taking 1 minute to unpack a scenario that just happened with a student to ask them how a diagnosis was rendered, why it was rendered, and how to communicate with a patient, right? So if you set that as your goal every single time, then your experiences now have a known structure every single time for your students to kind of latch on to. And that is wildly helpful to them because it provides context for what they're doing. It provides, remember, we talked about in tough that the students need to have everything be relevant. This also focuses a little bit on that what, why, and how for andragogy, right? So just think about those concepts with the student. The R, how are you going to cause the students to reflect, revisit, revise, rethink? We talked about scaffolding, right? So in this scaffolding model, you want to start thinking about when you are going to communicate with students that they did something well or not well, and it's important that you evaluate them both ways, right? What is working, what is not working, then scaffolding is a great way to really like use that as a framework for your feedback. And so what you want to get the student thinking about is the things that they did well that they want to hold on to, and the things that they didn't do as well that they need to adapt or evolve so that they can progress in their education. And so scaffolding is a great way to do that. Being clear with the student that this is an introductory exercise, or you expect them to have an introductory level knowledge of something. Sometimes you'll hear people call that base level 1 knowledge. And so you can tell them that, and that's fair. Or you can tell them that, you know, I expect mastery of this skill and you did not meet those expectations. And what I'd like you to do is go out, read some literature, watch some videos that are in our library resources, and then come back tomorrow more prepared for this clinical scenario, because you're going to be seeing it a lot. That is incredibly fair. But you really just want to think about, because you'll be moving with the students, right, from patient to patient around a clinical environment, you don't have just a ton of time to give lots and lots and lots of feedback, right? The students aren't there to slow you down. But what you can do is you can ask the students to keep this mindset about always reflecting, always revisiting, always revising, always rethinking what they're doing. And eventually they will start asking you questions about, so last time I utilized X approach and you said this was working or this was not working. This time in this clinical environment, I used Y approach and it had this outcome. How do you feel about that outcome? So that students at some point are doing self-evaluation and asking you as the expert, do you see the necessary growth and progress for me to move on to the next skill I need to master? And that makes sense, right? That's what we're here to do. So the T is, how do you tailor your instruction to meet the unique strengths and needs of a student? And really, truly, you should not have to do just a ton of tailoring with these students. But what you might find is that you have a student who is, I always use communication as this example because communication is either someone's great strength or they're just absolute kryptonite, right? How many of us know someone who is just like the world's worst communicator? And it just causes all kinds of problems to both in your professional life and personal life. So if you think about someone who has a really, their strength is communication and just like forming relationships easily with office staff and administrators and patients, then one of the things that you might see is that, wow, I really want this student to help in taking patient histories all the time because they're just so good at it. On the other side of that, you might have a student who's not so good at that, that they come off as aloof or not engaged with the patient for some reason in taking a history. And how do you kind of meet them where they are and say, you know, you have a really great strength in communication. Let's foster that, keep doing what you're doing. But also the student who's not good at it, how do you make adjustments so that you can still get what you need at the end of the day for a history, but they are also allowed room to grow? And it is very fair for you to tell someone, you need to work on your communication skills, but be specific about what they need to focus on. So if it's eye contact, say, you need to focus on your communication skills. I notice when you're speaking to our patients, you are not making appropriate eye contact. You are looking past them, or you are using inappropriate language, right? Or you are not using simple language, plain language. You are using elevated medical terms, and you are not breaking those down for the patient, so they are confused and anxious. You can talk about professionalism issues if there are professionalism issues, which hopefully there are not, but it could happen, right? And if there are professionalism issues, again, I want to say you will report that to your clinical coordinator and to medical student affairs, and we'll take care of it on our end. We'll make sure that we do not have students who are having professionalism issues out at your site. We want to be incredibly respectful of that. And then the O is, how are you going to organize learning experiences so that students move from instructor guided activities to more independent activities? And so that is really as simple as, how do you determine when a student gains your trust, right? That's what this kind of gauges for you in a clinical setting. How often can you leave them alone and trust that they are going to perform a task up to your expectations? How often are you going to need to interact with them in ways that you are directly supervising them? Our students should be pretty autonomous by the time that they get to you. So we expect that they will earn those high levels of trust, but there is an understanding, right, that when they come into your world, working with your patients, and that they have to earn that respect and they have to earn that trust. And that really, truly, that just takes time. But when this O says, how do you organize learning experiences students move, think about that scaffolding, right? So baby steps, small steps from one thing to another. And so think about setting up kind of these trust exercises and being intentional about how you gauge how that trust is earned. And it could be something as simple as, I need you to enter in these charts into the EMR. Okay, did the student do it well? Did the student do it in a timely fashion? Did they come to you with questions, right? Like anytime I ask someone to do something having to do with data entry and they have not worked with me before, if they do not come to me with a question, I see that as a red flag, because there is no way, well, one, I have the world's not worst handwriting. I do think it is legible, but I can almost guarantee you that they're not going to know what I wrote somewhere. So I need them to actually come back and ask me. But then also, I don't expect them to understand the way my mind works, right? These are not students who know you super well, and they are not probably going to know you super well even by the time they leave. So they should have questions about how to do data entry, or when you had this string of words together, what was the intent behind them? What is your shorthand? What does this mean? And if students aren't asking those kinds of questions, that would be a red flag for me. And I would say, okay, so if they're not asking me questions, then that means that I can't trust them to do this next more difficult task, because I'm going to need them to feel comfortable asking me questions before we move on. Does that make sense? So even in these kind of trust building exercises, there's still scaffolding, right? And we see that even in our day-to-day lives, where that's kind of how we test out the waters with both professionals and personal relationships, is you kind of build it one stage at a time and sort of, test the temperature as you go. Okay. The final thing I really kind of want to talk about, and we're going to spend kind of a lot of time on this slide, is creating a positive learning environment for the students. A positive learning environment for the students is really, really, really important, for especially for adult learners. If adult learners enter into a learning environment and it is already hostile, they're already shutting down. They already, remember I said someone doesn't feel comfortable asking questions. We don't want that, right? We want students to feel comfortable. So we want to make sure that we are providing a learning environment that is appropriate for the students, but is also welcoming to the students. And there are some ways that, and I want to be clear, the learning environment is not all faculty driven. A learning environment is a partnership between the faculty member and the student. So there are things that a student contributes, and if they are not, that will also contribute to a negative learning environment. But in general, faculty members have a lot of control over what a positive learning environment looks like. So one, set expectations, right? This is something that you can be extremely clear about. If you have an orientation for, like, let's say you're bringing on new residents, that's what you talk about, right? Is setting your expectations. What is this relationship we are establishing between the two of us? What are the lines that must not be crossed? How do you want to be talked to? Because one of the things you're not going to want, right, is, if your first name is Jim, you're not going to want to have a student call you Jim. It's Dr. whatever your last name is. That honorific is important. We know that. And so we want to establish right off the bat that students should call you Dr. whatever your last name is, and tell them that explicitly. It's okay also to just kind of hand them a piece of paper, if you have one for your entire clinical site, that these are our expectations for the clinical site. This is how you should comport yourself. Surely you probably have seen something like this when you were onboarded at your clinical site. But it's fair to tell the students right off the bat, this is how I like to be spoken to. This is how I like to be communicated with. This is what I expect from you in this kind of environment. This is what I expect from you in a different kind of environment. Be very clear and very explicit. What we find is that students thrive with that kind of structure. Where they tend to struggle is when there are no expectations given, because then what they do is they end up using comparisons and previous experiences to try to regulate how they interact in a new environment. And what ends up happening is that doesn't work well, right? So the rules at your clinical site might be different than the rules at another clinical site, or the way that you prefer to be spoken to as a clinician is different than someone else at another clinical site. All of that's fair, right? But setting those expectations not assuming that a student knows automatically exactly what you want from them is crucially important for a positive learning environment. And sometimes I've seen faculty feel anxious about setting the tone with setting expectations right away. And that is because I think inherently we all kind of want to be liked. And it feels like if we start off with rules and regulations and expectations, that people are going to see us as being overly stern. But that's just really not the case for adult learners, right? So for you and for me, I like to know what rules I'm playing by. I like to know the environment I'm walking into so that I can do my best and perform at my best for someone or for my own benefit. That is a way to be fair to the student. So if you have any anxiety about setting expectations verbally, my recommendation would be write them down. That just really truly make a printout and hand it to the students and say, I need you to review these expectations. Please let me know if you have any questions. We will discuss these later in the day. That's perfect. A student is going to love that. And it's not a lot of work to do that. And you will have much better outcomes with students and much quicker successful transitions into your clinical environment from the students if they know what they're getting into. The second one seems easy, but you'd be surprised how many people struggle with this. Know the students' names. Our students here, we call them student doctor, insert last name. And so our expectation of you all is that you will follow suit and also call them student doctor, insert last name. So if I was a medical student, you would call me student Dr. Collins. I am not a medical student, so for all intents and purposes here, you can just call me Claire. That will be fine. The next step, and I think I do an okay job of this, is just be approachable. Students feel, especially medical students, they have a hard time communicating what they don't know. They see that as a sign of weakness or vulnerability, to not know something, to not have mastered something right away, to have made a mistake. These are all very, very, very high performers. And so to make an error or to stumble really kind of knocks them around a little bit. And one of the things that really helps mitigate that, mitigate any self-doubt for the students, is just being approachable. Letting a student come to you and ask a question and say, hey, you performed a technique I haven't seen before, and I'm not sure why you chose to use this technique instead of this other one that I am familiar with. Being approachable allows a student to engage with you on that sort of not peer-to-peer level, but almost like coaching level, so that they are comfortable and that you are also comfortable. And I will say that if you are approachable in any way, that students will ask you questions and they will learn very, very, very quickly what kinds of questions to ask you, what level of depth they should be asking, and then also what they need to be learning on their own. And also, I want to reiterate something from last session. If there are things that you have already explained to a student and they have not done their due diligence and gone and done additional research about that topic or educated themselves appropriately, it is absolutely 100% fair of you to say, I will not be answering this question again. It is time for you to, pick up that load. They have to accept their load. If you are being approachable, it does not change you being approachable to hold someone accountable. Those two things are not connected. The next one is your attitude matters. So something that is known about me in my office, I'm kind of cranky in the morning. But I tell my staff that I have no real control over being cranky in the morning. I don't drink caffeine, and I will tell you honestly, back in the olden days, the caffeine didn't matter anyway. I'm not 100% myself early in the morning. And what I found, is that I wasn't as approachable. People didn't ask me questions. And so I didn't get a lot of good work done in the morning, and my staff also didn't get a lot of good work done in the morning. And it wasn't because they weren't performing, it was because my attitude wasn't where it needed to be. So as a result, I now get up an entire hour earlier every single day so that I can be more myself when I come to work. Doesn't mean I also go to bed almost an hour earlier. Yes, it does, but that's okay. So your attitude matters. It really, truly does. If you are engaged in a student's learning, they will be engaged with you. If you are apathetic, they will not trust you. It is as easy as that. So just know that students are really good at reading if you want them to be there and if you want to be engaged with them. And just know that there are always going to be days when you have an off day that maybe you were a little curt with a student or that you were impatient. That is normal. It just shouldn't be the norm. And then it is your job to facilitate learning. It is not your job to ensure that the student is carrying their load and doing the learning. You are there to act as a guide. You are not responsible for all of the learning happening. So just be very clear with the student where your role ends and their role begins. They will respect you for that, and they will take that with them. And honestly, if you set boundaries with the students, what will end up happening is they'll come more prepared the next day. This is something we see over and over and over again, is if I tell the students, hey, I will not be discussing this topic again. Next time when you come and speak to me, please have this material prepared in this way so that we can have a more in-depth discussion and move forward together. Then they will show up the next day with all of their pre-reading done, able to perform better than they did before. That is very, very, very common in our students. So just know that your role is to be the facilitator. You are not the end all be all, and you are not the person who is responsible for their end game learning. The student is responsible for that. Enable discussion. So enable discussion is actually, I know that that might seem similar to be approachable, but enable discussion is actually more about enabling discussion with their own peers. So recommending to students to reach out to their peers and to reach out to their colleagues so they establish firm educational networks. How many times in your own practice or service have you said, you know, I'm kind of stuck on something and I've reviewed the literature. You know what, I'm just going to call this person I know in Texarkana and they're an expert and I need a second opinion on this. We want them to engage in that kind of learning as well. And that's what you do when you enable discussion. So when you're speaking to a student, if there's a topic that they're not clear about, you've provided as much context as you can. You can say, okay, so this is a great opportunity for you to reach out to a peer or to your classmates who are also out on clinical rotations, right? Like we know these students are learning essentially the same content in different orders. So just send them to their peers. Their peers are a great source of information and knowledge. And also it encourages collegiality and teamwork, and we want that. And then the last one is really just encouraging open communication. So letting students come to you and say, I have a concern, or I don't know how to do something. And just letting them know that you're there really helps a lot. Again, it kind of goes back to that, your attitude matters. If you're engaged and you're encouraging open communication, students will be very transparent with you about where they are struggling and then where they are thriving and what their expectations of you are, so that you can tell them, yes, those expectations make sense, or no, those expectations are not in alignment with what we will be doing. And it is fair for you to say that as well. So the student contribution side of this is really straightforward, and you'll see that they kind of mirror what the faculty contributions are. We talked about this a lot, but the students, in order to contribute to a good learning environment, they have to engage in the material or the learning environment. If a student, like, you know, heaven forbid, was ever out on a clinical rotation and you were speaking to a patient and they were on their phone, that is not appropriate. They shouldn't have their phone out. Potentially, depending on the clinical environment, they shouldn't have their phone at all, right? And so we would never want to see that. And our students are not going to do that. I simply use that as an example. But they want to engage in that material, the learning environment. They have to be present. And right, just the same way students know if you're not present, you're going to know if they're disengaged as well. So if you see that you have a disengaged student, you have two kind of options. One, you can be approachable and you can encourage that open communication and speak to the student about it. Hey, you seemed a little checked out today. Is there something going on? Maybe there is, and we need to call medical student affairs and have a wellness check. Or maybe we need to talk to a regional coordinator. They're stressed out about something. But it could also just be that the student's not being very professional. And if that's the case, again, we will take care of that on our end. It is not necessarily your job to teach students professionalism. It is your job in this scenario to model professionalism. And so we will take care of the rest. Students also need to foster their own group learning. Just about, this is the mirror of that enabled discussion, right? So the same way that you're enabling discussion, they have to foster group learning, understanding that you are not the center of their universe, that they need to go to their peers. Again, another contribution the student make, they ask questions. If you have a student who isn't asking questions, a really easy trick is to say at the end of every patient encounter or at the end of every day, I expect you to have 2 to 3 questions for me. Please write them down. That is an easy fix, right? So like at the end of this CME session, we have 3 assessment questions, correct? And so I will give you those and you have to be able to answer them. So this is kind of the same thing. It's like, do a knowledge check. And you can actually just say, write down your questions, do it, go ahead and do it. My expectation is you will ask questions, set those boundaries. Students have to be able to give feedback, right? They have to give feedback about, this type of environment worked really well for me. I really appreciated the approach. It was excellent. I learned a lot. But then also, if you are open, if you are encouraging open communication, students need to be able to give feedback that might potentially be negative as well, professionally, but negative, and say, you know, it appears we're not communicating super well. I feel unclear about the expectations in this environment. Could you please tell me what your expectations are of me, the student? We have coached our students to ask questions like that. So please don't be surprised if a student says, I am unclear on what the expectations are of me in this environment, so that you can then provide that structure so that they are playing by your rules so that you can all thrive together. Again, they have to engage in self-reflection. See how these kind of topics keep coming up again and again and again. Self-reflection, revisiting things, relearning things, redesigning things, like that happens over and over and over again in adult learning. And so it is not just up to you to pinpoint what's going well and what's not going well for our students. They also need to be doing that for themselves. They should be able to do that for themselves. They have to be able to participate in mutual learning opportunities. And really what that means is every clinical environment, even when you're not with the patient, is a learning opportunity for them. Getting to learn how administration works, getting to learn how to work with the various other staff that work at in a clinical environment is going to be really, really beneficial to them. And they have to be open to that. And they have to understand that they're a part of a healthcare team, that they're not working on their own, they're not working in a silo, they're not working individually, because none of you all are, right? That they have to be open to learning more about how every other member of this healthcare team performs their jobs so that we have good patient outcomes. And then finally, students have to be professional, right? It is your job to model professionalism, not teach professionalism. And students have to then show you that they are taking in what you are modeling and that they are being professional with you, being professional with your administrators, being professional with your staff, being professional with your patients. I cannot emphasize this enough. If you ever have a professionalism issue with our students, please let us know right away. We take that very, very, very seriously, and we will take care of it immediately. It is 12:50, so I finished basically right on time. I want to wrap up by just reiterating kind of what we went through today. We talked a little bit about scaffolding, this idea that students, when they come to us, they don't know everything because they are still students, and understanding and get our mind focused on when we are entering into a learning environment. If it's the first time a student has experienced something, we should not expect mastery, but it is okay to tell a student in a week, I expect you to have mastery of this. We then talked about backwards design. And backwards design is really just this concept of not ensuring that we are teaching everything that we need to teach with minimal to no overlap. And that's what we utilize here at SHS UCOM, so that we can let you know that if you are teaching something to our students, it is likely either not being taught somewhere else or it's being taught at a different level. So there are certain introductory skills that students learn in our clinical medicine courses that you'll see that they already have some knowledge of what to do in a patient environment, but that they will not have mastered that yet. And then we talked a little bit about the where to method, right? Which is about when you're trying to put together kind of instruction for students or thinking about your approach, you kind of want to think about, why is something important? How do I keep the student engaged? Why is this meaningful? What are we going to do? How am I going to assess it? And then how am I going to encourage students to relearn and revisit and then self-reflect? And then finally, we talked about creating a positive learning environment. We talked about where the faculty contribute to positive learning environments, and then where students contribute to positive learning environments, understanding that this is a team approach, that neither party is fully responsible for creating this positive learning environment. It is something that we do together. And then finally, the last things that I kind of mentioned, I introduced the concept of you have regional clinical coordinators. So if you have questions, you can always reach out to them. But also we have here on our campus, the Office of Medical Student Affairs. And so if you're having concerns about professionalism, please let your regional clinical coordinator know. And then we can work with Medical Student Affairs to ensure that a student is either realigned or is meeting those professionalism expectations. And the same thing happens right with wellness. If you see someone having anxiety, if they're struggling in ways they shouldn't be, and you are concerned about a student for some reason, that you can tell your regional clinical coordinator, and then they can relay that information to Medical Student Affairs so that we can get a student, with the proper services, connected to the proper services as soon as possible. And then I also made an offer that if you are working on doing your own curriculum design, if you are interested in learning more about backwards design so that you too can ensure that the curriculum that you want to put in place is in fact the best version that it can be, that you can always reach out to me or to Ms. Browning at any time, and we're happy to schedule a time to come out to your clinical site. So for the final slide, if you have questions, now is the time to ask them. But also, if you don't have any questions and you're just looking for a way to claim your CME credit, we do have a QR code here on our last slide. And then Ms. Browning has also put a survey link in the bottom. Please make sure to fill this out. And now is the time. We have about 6 minutes if there are any questions. Okay, it seems like we do not currently have any questions. I do want to thank you for your time today. I hope that you enjoyed this faculty development session. In the spring, Ms. Browning and I will be looking for clinical sites to volunteer to host us so that we can host faculty development from your clinical site. So if you are interested in having us come out and then we will zoom out to all of our other clinical partners, this is a great opportunity for you all to learn a little bit more about who our other clinical partners are, but also to potentially show off some of your facility and your faculty and things like that. We are looking for partners so that we can deliver live from where you are in the spring. We will come to you. But again, I just want to also remind you that if you'd like us to come out and deliver any faculty development live, that you are more than welcome to reach out at any time, and we are happy to make those arrangements. Oh, and one final thing, we are having faculty development happening in December, and the topic is library resources. So accessing things, resources that SHSU COM provides. Danette Null has asked, will this be recorded? And we'd like to share this. We are recording this and we can send this to you so that it can be shared.
Okay, Ms. Collins, I haven't gotten any questions, so I think we are good to go. If anyone has any questions or any follow-up, feel free to shoot me an email at com-aipd@shsu.edu. And otherwise, I will follow up with an email to everyone with all of the information already provided in the chat. I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon and a great weekend.